The day my son called me a burden was the day I stopped being a mother who sacrificed everything. For 35 years, I'd given up my dreams, my comfort, even my health, all to ensure he had the best life possible. But as I stood in the hallway of Meadowbrook Assisted Living Facility, watching my son Michael sign papers to admit me against my will, I realized that decades of love meant nothing when measured against inconvenience. "It's for the best, Mom," he said, not meeting my eyes. "You're getting older, and we just can't handle the responsibility anymore." What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that beneath my modest clothes and unassuming manner, I had quietly built a $3 million fortune. And I was about to teach them all exactly what happens when you underestimate a woman who's had to fight for everything her entire life. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Barbara Wilson, and until 3 months ago, I lived in the same modest 3-bedroom home in Riverdale where I'd raised my son Michael for the past 35 years. It wasn't grand or luxurious, but it was mine, paid for with countless double shifts, early mornings, and late nights. The walls held memories of birthday parties and homework sessions, teenage arguments and graduation celebrations. Every scratch on the hardwood floors and chip in the kitchen counters told the story of a life built through persistence and sacrifice. I'd always been the practical one, the steady one. After my husband Thomas died of a sudden stroke when Michael was only 5, I became both mother and father overnight. There was no time for grief, no space for self-pity. I had a kindergartner who still didn't understand why Daddy wasn't coming home, and a mortgage that didn't care that I'd just become a widow. The life insurance barely covered the funeral expenses and 3 months of bills. After that, we were on our own. I still remember the night I sat at our kitchen table, surrounded by bills and final notices, trying to figure out how to stretch my secretary's salary to cover expenses that had previously been handled by 2 incomes. The math simply didn't work. That night, I made 2 promises to myself. First, that Michael would never feel the sting of poverty, and second, that I would never again be this financially vulnerable. The next morning, I walked into Hartwell Community College and signed up for night classes in accounting. For the next 3 years, I worked during the day, attended classes in the evening, and studied late into the night after Michael was asleep. I graduated with my associate's degree and secured a position as a bookkeeper at Henderson Manufacturing, a small but stable company that offered decent benefits and was close enough to home that I could still pick Michael up from school most days. The job at Henderson wasn't glamorous, and it certainly wasn't what I'd dreamed of doing with my life. Before Thomas died, I'd been taking art classes, nurturing a long-held ambition to become an illustrator. But dreams don't put food on the table or braces on a growing boy's teeth. So I tucked my sketchbooks away in the attic and focused on the columns of numbers that would keep our little family afloat. As Michael grew, so did his needs and the associated costs. Sports equipment, summer camps, school trips, college prep courses. I never said no. Instead, I found ways to make it work. I took on freelance bookkeeping jobs on weekends. I cleaned houses for some of the wealthier families in town. During the Christmas season, I worked retail at the mall from 6 p.m. to midnight after finishing my day job. I became an expert at finding bargains, stretching meals, and making things last just a little longer than they were designed to. Through it all, Michael flourished. He was a bright, curious child who grew into a confident, ambitious young man. His teachers praised his intelligence and work ethic. His coaches appreciated his team spirit and determination. When he was accepted to State University with a partial scholarship, I felt a pride so fierce it almost knocked me off my feet. Every exhausting hour, every skipped meal, every postponed dream had been worth it. The scholarships and grants covered about 60% of his education. For the rest, I remortgaged the house, cashed in the small investment portfolio I'd painstakingly built, and picked up even more side work. Michael graduated with a business degree and no student debt, something I made sure of, even when it meant I went without. When he landed his first job at Meridian Technologies, I finally allowed myself to breathe a little easier. My son was launched into adulthood, equipped with everything he needed to succeed. I thought my days of major sacrifice were behind me. I was 58 then, not young but not old either, with decades of productive life ahead. Perhaps now I could finally revisit some of those dreams I'd set aside. I had just started taking a painting class at the community center when Michael called with exciting news. He was engaged to Vanessa, a marketing executive he'd met through work. I was thrilled for him. Vanessa seemed intelligent and ambitious, if a bit reserved around me. I attributed her coolness to nerves and hoped that as we got to know each other better, we would develop a warmer relationship. The wedding planning consumed the next year of our lives. Vanessa came from a family with significant social standing. Her father was a surgeon. Her mother sat on the boards of several prominent charities. Their vision for the wedding was elaborate and expensive. When Michael sheepishly admitted they were struggling to cover the costs, I didn't hesitate. I wrote a check for $30,000, nearly all of my emergency fund, as my contribution to their special day. In hindsight, I should have recognized the shift in our relationship that began during those wedding preparations. The way Michael and Vanessa consulted me about logistics, but never about decisions. The way they accepted my financial contribution without really acknowledging the magnitude of it. The way Vanessa's parents treated me with polite condescension, as if my lack of a college degree and modest career somehow made me less worthy of respect. But I was so happy for Michael, so eager to support his new beginning, that I overlooked these warning signs. I told myself that every family has adjustment periods, that Vanessa and I would find common ground eventually, that Michael was just caught up in the excitement of his new life and would soon return to being the thoughtful, appreciative son I'd raised. The wedding was beautiful, if ostentatious. I sat in the front row, wearing a new dress I'd saved for months to afford, watching my son begin the next chapter of his life. I allowed myself a moment of pure, uncomplicated joy. Despite all the hardships, despite the endless work and worry, I had succeeded in my most important task, raising a son who could stand on his own, who had opportunities I never did. After the honeymoon, Michael and Vanessa bought a house in Chadursa, Lakeview Estates, an exclusive development across town. The down payment came from Vanessa's parents, a fact she mentioned frequently in conversations. Their home was nearly 3 times the size of mine, with soaring ceilings, gleaming hardwood floors, and a gourmet kitchen Vanessa rarely used. They filled it with expensive furniture purchased on credit and hosted dinner parties for Michael's colleagues and Vanessa's family friends. I was invited to these gatherings occasionally, but always felt slightly out of place. The conversations revolved around vacation properties, private schools, and investment strategies, worlds I had no access to. When I tried to contribute, mentioning a documentary I'd watched or a book I'd read, I was met with polite but dismissive nods before the conversation shifted back to topics where my input wasn't needed. Still, I cherished my relationship with Michael. We had Sunday dinners together twice a month, sometimes at my house, where I cooked his favorite meals, and sometimes at restaurants Vanessa selected. He called regularly, though our conversations grew shorter and more perfunctory. We were still connected, still important parts of each other's lives, even as those lives diverged in significant ways. Then came my 65th birthday. I had no grand plans, just a small dinner with some friends from work and my painting class. Michael and Vanessa were supposed to join us, but they canceled at the last minute. Something about a networking event they couldn't miss. I understood. Disappointment was an old companion for me, easily managed with practiced grace. The following weekend, they invited me to lunch at their house. It was unusual. Our Sunday dinners typically happened in The evening, but I didn't think much of it. I arrived with a homemade apple pie, Michael's favorite since childhood. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. From the moment I stepped through their front door, I sensed something was different. Vanessa was overly solicitous, taking my coat and asking repeatedly if I wanted tea or coffee. Michael seemed unable to meet my eyes, fidgeting with his watch, in a way I recognized from his childhood, a nervous habit that emerged whenever he had something difficult to say. We sat in their formal living room, a space so carefully curated it looked like a furniture showroom, untouched by daily life. Michael cleared his throat several times before finally speaking. "Mom, we've been thinking about your situation," he began, his voice unnaturally even, as if he'd rehearsed this speech. "You're living alone in that big house, and you're not getting any younger." I remember feeling a flicker of amusement at the phrase, "big house." My entire home could fit into their first floor with room to spare. But I stayed silent, waiting to see where this was going. "We've been doing some research," Vanessa interjected, her tone brisk and efficient, "about senior living options." "Senior living options?" I echoed, confusion replacing my earlier amusement. "I'm 65, not 95, and I'm perfectly capable of living independently." "Of course you are, Mom," Michael said quickly, shooting Vanessa a look I couldn't quite interpret. "It's just that. Well, that house has a lot of stairs, and the maintenance is probably getting to be too much for you." "I manage just fine," I said, a defensive edge creeping into my voice. "The stairs keep me active, and I have a service that handles the lawn care now." "It's not just about the house," Vanessa said, leaning forward. "It's about your overall quality of life. These senior communities have activities, social events, people your own age to talk to." I looked between them, realization slowly dawning. "Are you suggesting I move into a retirement home?" "Not a retirement home," Michael corrected hastily. "A senior living community. There's a big difference. These places are like resorts, Mom. Swimming pools, fitness centers, movie nights." "I have no interest in moving," I said firmly. "I love my home. I have friends in the neighborhood. My painting class is just down the street." "We thought you might feel that way initially," Vanessa said, her voice taking on the patronizing tone one might use with a stubborn child. "That's why we've arranged for a tour of Meadowbrook next weekend. Just to look. No commitment." "Meadowbrook?" The name was vaguely familiar. "It's that beautiful new complex on Westfield Road," Michael explained. "Very modern, very upscale. They have different levels of care, so as your needs change, you won't have to move again." "As I get more decrepit, you mean?" I said, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. "Mom, that's not fair," Michael protested. "We're just trying to plan ahead, to make sure you're taken care of." "I've been taking care of myself since before you were born," I reminded him. "And I've been taking care of both of us since your father died. I think I can manage to decide where I want to live." "Of course you can," Vanessa soothed, though her expression suggested she thought otherwise. "But would it really hurt to just take a look, for our peace of mind, if nothing else?" I wanted to refuse. Everything in me rebelled against the idea that I needed to be managed or placed somewhere. But I could see that Michael was genuinely concerned in his misguided way, and I had always found it difficult to deny him anything. "Fine," I conceded reluctantly. "I'll go on the tour, but I'm not making any promises." The relief on their faces was palpable. Vanessa immediately launched into details about Meadowbrook's amenities, while Michael visibly relaxed, as if a difficult hurdle had been cleared. Neither of them seemed to notice that I barely touched my lunch or that I declined a slice of the pie I'd brought. As I drove home that afternoon, a disquieting thought kept circling in my mind. When had I transitioned in their eyes from a capable, independent woman to someone who needed to be managed? Was it simply my age? Or had they always seen me this way, as someone less competent, less worthy of autonomy than themselves? I pushed these thoughts aside as I pulled into my driveway. My house welcomed me with familiar comfort. The slightly crooked mailbox I kept meaning to fix. The rose bushes I'd planted when Michael started kindergarten, now full and lush. Inside, every room held memories and meaning. The idea of leaving it felt like contemplating the amputation of a limb. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd paid bills and helped with homework and planned birthday parties, and allowed myself to confront some uncomfortable truths. Michael and Vanessa weren't suggesting Meadowbrook, out of concern for my well-being. They were thinking of their own convenience. Having me settled in a facility would free them from whatever obligation they felt toward me. It would tidy me away, out of sight and largely out of mind, packaged with activities and peers, so they wouldn't have to feel guilty about visiting less and less. And beneath this realization lay another, more painful one. They assumed I couldn't afford to make my own choices. They looked at my modest house, my practical car, my simple lifestyle, and concluded that I was financially vulnerable, that I would eventually become a burden they would have to bear. They had no idea that beneath my unassuming exterior lay decades of careful financial planning. They didn't know about the night classes I took in investment strategies while Michael was in high school, or the inheritance from my Aunt Mildred, that I had parlayed into a diversified portfolio instead of spending on home improvements or vacations. They didn't know about the rental properties I had slowly acquired over the years, starting with a small duplex near the university, then adding a commercial space downtown, and finally a small apartment building on the east side of town. Each purchase carefully researched, each mortgage strategically structured, each property managed with meticulous attention to detail. They didn't know about my friendship with Eleanor Simmons, a retired investment banker who had taken me under her wing after we met at a financial literacy workshop for women. Eleanor had taught me about municipal bonds and REITs, and the power of compound interest. She had shown me how to read balance sheets and annual reports, how to recognize value that others missed, how to be patient and disciplined in building wealth. They didn't know that the conservative bookkeeper who had raised a son on a modest salary had transformed, over decades of learning and strategic decisions, into a millionaire several times over. My net worth now stood at just over $3 million, not counting the equity in my too-big house with too many stairs. I had kept my financial situation private not out of secrecy, but out of a deep-seated belief that money shouldn't change how people treat you. I didn't want Michael to see me differently, or to feel entitled to wealth he hadn't earned. I planned to leave him a substantial inheritance, of course, but I wanted him to build his own life on his own terms, just as I had. Now, sitting at my kitchen table, I wondered if that had been a mistake. If Michael and Vanessa had known about my financial situation, would they still be so eager to move me into Meadowbrook? Would they still see me as a potential burden to be managed rather than as a person with agency and capability? The following Saturday arrived with unseasonable warmth for October. I dressed carefully for the Meadowbrook tour, not in my usual comfortable slacks and sweater, but in a tailored pantsuit I reserved for special occasions. I applied makeup with precision, styled my silver hair, and put on the pearl earrings Thomas had given me for our 10th anniversary. Michael seemed surprised when he picked me up. "You look nice, Mom," he said, a note of confusion in his voice. "Thank you," I replied simply. I had decided to approach this tour as a fact-finding mission. I would be polite but observant, gathering information not about whether Meadowbrook would suit me, but about what Michael and Vanessa's true motivations were. Vanessa was waiting for us in the lobby of Meadowbrook, alongside a woman in a crisp blazer who introduced herself as Diane Forrester, Director of Resident Relations. The facility was undeniably beautiful. Modern architecture, abundant natural light, tasteful decor. We toured the common areas first. A dining room with linen tablecloths, a library with leather armchairs, a fitness center with equipment designed for mature users. Our residents find that the social aspect is really what makes Meadowbrook special, Diane explained as we walked. There's always something happening: book clubs, movie nights, day trips to museums and theaters. It sounds like summer camp for seniors, I observed, keeping my tone neutral. That's actually a comparison we hear often, Diane laughed. And what's wrong with a little structured fun? Studies show that social engagement is crucial for maintaining cognitive health as we age. We moved on to view the apartments. They started with the smallest units. Perfect for someone transitioning from a larger home, Diane explained, showing us a studio apartment barely larger than my master bedroom at home. The furniture was scaled to fit the space, making it seem more spacious than it was, but I couldn't imagine fitting even a fraction of my belongings into such a confined area. What about her things? Michael asked, echoing my thoughts. Her furniture, Most of our residents find that downsizing can be quite liberating, Diane assured him. We offer resources to help with the process: estate sale coordinators, donation services. Many people find that letting go of material possessions creates space for new experiences. My possessions aren't just things, I said quietly. They're memories, history. Of course, Diane nodded sympathetically. And you're welcome to bring special items. Many residents create memory walls with photographs and keepsakes. We continued to a one-bedroom unit, slightly larger, but still constraining compared to my home. Then finally, to a premium suite, a two-bedroom apartment with a small balcony overlooking a carefully landscaped courtyard. This is our most luxurious option, Diane said proudly. They don't become available often, but as it happens, we've just had a resident transition to our assisted living wing, so this particular unit is open. It's lovely, Vanessa said, walking through the space with an appraising eye. Don't you think so, Barbara? You could have your bedroom and use the second room as a sitting area or hobby space. Before I could respond, Diane interjected. Now, shall we discuss the financial aspects? Why don't we head back to my office where we can be comfortable? Diane's office was designed to put families at ease. Soft lighting, comfortable chairs, a shelf of books on aging and retirement. She pulled out glossy brochures and a folder of documents. At Meadowbrook, we pride ourselves on transparency, she began. Our fee structure is straightforward. There's an initial entrance fee, which secures your residence, and then monthly fees that cover all amenities, services, and most care needs. She slid a paper across the desk. I glanced down and saw numbers that made my accountant's heart skip a beat. An entrance fee of $350,000 for the premium suite, followed by monthly fees of $5,200. That seems substantial, I said carefully. Quality care comes at a price, Diane acknowledged. But compared to maintaining a home, mortgage, utilities, repairs, property taxes, many families find it's actually quite reasonable. My home is paid for, I pointed out, and my property taxes are manageable. For now, Vanessa interjected, but as costs rise and the house ages, that could change. And we haven't even talked about what happens if you need more care. The beauty of our continuing care model, Diane explained, is that if your needs increase, the transition to assisted living or skilled nursing is seamless. There are additional costs for those levels of care, of course, but having everything on one campus provides invaluable peace of mind. For whom? I asked, the question slipping out before I could stop it. A brief, uncomfortable silence followed. Diane recovered first. For everyone, she said smoothly. For the resident, knowing they won't have to move again, and for the family, knowing their loved one is receiving appropriate care. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak further. The subtext was clear. Meadowbrook wasn't designed for my benefit, but for Michael and Vanessa's. It would absolve them of worry and responsibility. It would ensure that I was someone else's concern. Now, about the financial qualification process. Diane continued. We'll need to verify assets and income to ensure that the entrance fee and monthly costs are sustainable for the long term. Our financial counselors can help explore options if needed. Long-term care insurance, home equity conversion, that sort of thing. I'm sure that won't be necessary, I said, my voice steady despite the anger building inside me. I understand the costs involved. Mom has some savings, Michael added quickly, and her house would sell for a decent amount in the current market, plus her pension from Henderson. I felt a flash of indignation at Michael's casual assessment of my financial situation, as if my life's assets could be summed up in a sentence, as if decisions about my home and savings were somehow his to discuss. I think I've seen enough for today, I said, rising from my chair. Thank you for the tour, Diane. It's certainly given me a lot to think about. Of course, Diane said, standing as well. I know it's a big decision. Please take one of my cards. I'm happy to answer any questions that come up as you consider your options. I took the card automatically, slipping it into my purse. Michael and Vanessa exchanged glances, clearly disappointed that I hadn't shown more enthusiasm. The drive home was awkwardly silent. I could feel Michael's desire to ask what I thought, to push for a commitment, but something in my demeanor must have warned him against it. We pulled into my driveway and he turned off the engine but didn't immediately move to get out of the car. Mom, he began hesitantly, I know Meadowbrook is expensive, but we could make it work. If we sell your house? We? I interrupted. There is no we in this decision, Michael. It's my house, my life. I'm just trying to help, he protested. Vanessa and I have been talking, and we're worried about you being alone as you get older. What if you fall? What if you get sick? We both work full-time, and with the baby coming. Baby? I cut in, momentarily distracted. Vanessa is pregnant? A flush crept up Michael's neck. We were going to tell you today, after the tour. Vanessa is 10 weeks along, due in May. A grandchild. Under different circumstances, this would have been joyous news. Instead, it felt like another piece of a puzzle I hadn't realized I was assembling. The sudden interest in my living situation. The urgency to have me settled. Congratulations, I said, the word hollow in my mouth. That's wonderful news. Thanks, Michael said, looking relieved. So you see why we're thinking about these things now. With a baby coming, we won't have as much time to check on you, to help out if you need something. And there it was, laid bare. I wasn't being moved to Meadowbrook for my benefit, but to minimize my impact on their lives. I was a loose end to be tied up before the baby arrived. I've managed on my own for a very long time, I reminded him. I don't anticipate that changing. But that's the point, Mom. You shouldn't have to manage on your own. Meadowbrook would give you community, activities, support. And it would give you peace of mind, I added, unable to keep a slight edge from my voice. Knowing I'm tucked away safely, not requiring your time or attention. That's not fair, Michael protested, though his eyes slid away from mine. We want what's best for you. What's best for me, I said firmly, is to live in my own home, making my own choices, for as long as I'm able, which, based on my last physical, should be for quite some time yet. But the costs are my concern, not yours. I reached for the door handle, suddenly exhausted by the conversation. Thank you for driving me today. I need some time to think. I didn't wait for his response, just got out of the car and walked up my front path without looking back. Inside, I leaned against the closed door, breathing in the familiar sense of home. Lemon polish, the faint sweetness of the roses I'd cut from the garden yesterday, the subtle mustiness of books well loved and often read. How had we come to this? When had my son, the child I'd sacrificed everything for, decided that my convenience was less important than his? When had I become a problem to be solved rather than a person to be respected? And what was I going to do about it? I spent the evening after the Meadowbrook tour sitting in my garden, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of amber and rose. The rhododendrons I'd planted 20 years ago had grown into a magnificent hedge, providing privacy from the neighboring yards. My thoughts were as tangled as the wisteria vines that climbed the old oak tree at the far end of the property. What had happened to the relationship between Michael and me? When had it shifted from mutual respect to something so unbalanced? I couldn't pinpoint a single moment of change, just a gradual erosion, like water wearing away stone over time. My phone buzzed with a text from Michael. "Hope you're doing okay. Just want you to know we're only thinking of what's best for you." I didn't respond. What could I say that wouldn't either escalate the tension or require me to pretend his behavior was acceptable? Better to let the silence speak for me. The next morning, I woke with clarity and purpose. If Michael and Vanessa saw me as financially vulnerable, as a potential burden, perhaps it was time to correct that misperception, not out of spite or a desire for revenge, but because the truth might be the only way to reset our relationship on more equal footing. I made coffee and carried it to my home office, a small room off the kitchen that had once been a breakfast nook. The built-in desk was covered with neatly organized folders and a laptop that was several years old but served my needs perfectly. I logged into my various financial accounts, taking time to review the balances and recent transactions. First, my main checking account at Riverdale Community Bank, the one Michael knew about, with its modest balance of $4,682.63. Enough to cover my regular expenses with a small cushion, but nothing that would suggest significant wealth. Then, the accounts he didn't know about. Investment portfolios at 3 different brokerages, retirement accounts from both my years at Henderson and my independent work, and separate checking accounts for managing my rental properties. The numbers added up quickly. $1. $2 million in diverse stock holdings, $850,000 in bonds and treasury bills, $1. $7 million in real estate equity, not counting my own home, and another $550,000 in cash equivalents and precious metals. The total, just over $4 or $3 million, still surprised even me sometimes. I hadn't set out to become wealthy. I had simply wanted security, independence, the ability to make choices without financial constraints dictating my options. But decades of disciplined saving, careful investing, and the occasional calculated risk had accumulated more significantly than I'd anticipated. It wasn't generational wealth, but it was more than enough to ensure I would never need to depend on Michael or anyone else for support. I printed out account summaries, organized them in a leather portfolio folder, and then made 3 phone calls. The first was to James Harrington at Meridian Bank, who had been my financial advisor for the past 15 years. "Barbara, good to hear from you," James said warmly. "What can I do for you today?" "I need your help with a delicate situation," I explained. "My son has some misconceptions about my financial status, and I think it's time to clear them up. Could you prepare a comprehensive summary of my accounts and assets? Something official, on bank letterhead?" "Of course," James replied, his tone shifting to professional concern. "May I ask what prompted this? You've always been quite private about your finances." "Let's just say I'm being encouraged to make decisions based on financial limitations that don't actually exist," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I'd like to have documentation when I correct those assumptions." "I understand," James said, and I could hear him typing notes. "I'll have that ready for you by tomorrow afternoon. Will you come by the office to pick it up? Or would you like me to send it by courier?" "I'll come in person," I decided. "And James, could you set aside an hour or so? I may need your expertise during a conversation with my son." "Absolutely. Just let me know when, and I'll clear my calendar." My second call was to Patricia Chen, my attorney. We'd met at a women's networking event years ago and had developed both a professional relationship and a friendship. Patricia specialized in elder law and estate planning, navigating the complex intersections of aging, assets, and family dynamics with both expertise and compassion. "Patricia, I need your advice," I said when she answered, "and possibly your presence at a meeting." I explained the situation with Michael and Meadowbrook, the assumptions being made about my financial status, and my decision to reveal the truth about my assets. Patricia listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment before responding. "Barbara, I'm sorry you're going through this. Unfortunately, it's a scenario I see far too often. Adult children making decisions for their parents rather than with them, especially when finances are involved. What concerns me," I admitted, "is that once Michael knows about my assets, he might feel entitled to them in some way. Or he might feel I deceived him by not being more transparent about my financial situation over the years." "Those are valid concerns," Patricia acknowledged, "which is why I think it's important we review your estate plan before this meeting. When was the last time we updated your will and powers of attorney?" "About 3 years ago," I said, "after I purchased the Madison Street property." "Let's schedule a time to go through everything before you meet with Michael. We want to ensure your wishes are clearly documented and legally protected. And yes, I'd be happy to attend the meeting with you if you'd like. Sometimes having a professional present changes the dynamic in beneficial ways." We set an appointment for later that week, and I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. Having Patricia in my corner made me more confident about the path ahead. My third call was the most difficult. I dialed Michael's number, rehearsing what I would say as the phone rang. When he answered, I kept my tone neutral, businesslike. "Michael, I've given some thought to our discussion about my living situation and future plans. I think it's time we had a more comprehensive conversation. Could you and Vanessa meet me at Meridian Bank on Friday at 2 p.m.? I've arranged for my financial advisor to join us." "Your financial advisor?" Michael sounded confused. "I didn't know you had one." "There are quite a few things you don't know," I said simply, "which is why this meeting is important. Mom, if this is about Meadowbrook, we don't need to involve bankers. We can just talk." "This is about more than Meadowbrook," I interrupted. "This is about respect, autonomy, and accurate information. Friday at 2. Please let me know if you and Vanessa can make it." There was a pause, then Michael sighed. "All right. I'll check with Vanessa and let you know, but I think we can make it work." "Thank you. I'll text you the address and details." After hanging up, I sat for a moment, my heart racing despite the calm I'd maintained during the call. This was it, the beginning of a significant shift in my relationship with my son. I hoped that once the truth was known, we could rebuild on a foundation of mutual respect. But I also acknowledged the possibility that things might get worse before they got better. The days leading up to Friday passed in a blur of preparation. I met with Patricia to review my estate plan, making a few adjustments to ensure my wishes were clearly documented. I had coffee with Eleanor Simmons, my investment mentor, and explained what I was about to do. "It's about time," Eleanor said, approvingly. "You've worked too hard and been too smart to be treated like some helpless old lady. Show them who you really are, Barbara." Friday arrived crisp and clear. I dressed with particular care, a tailored charcoal suit I'd purchased for a real estate closing last year, pearl earrings, low heels that were both elegant and comfortable. I wanted to project competence, confidence, and dignity. Not for Michael and Vanessa's benefit, but for my own. I arrived at Meridian Bank 20 minutes early. James met me in the lobby and escorted me to a conference room where Patricia was already waiting. The table was set with water glasses and notepads, giving the space the formal atmosphere of a business meeting rather than a family discussion. "Are you ready for this?" Patricia asked quietly as James stepped out to check on something. "Yes," I said, and I meant it. No matter how they react, I'll know I've stood up for myself. That matters more than their response. At precisely 2 p.m., James returned with Michael and Vanessa in tow. Michael looked puzzled, Vanessa vaguely annoyed. Neither had dressed for a formal meeting. Michael in khakis and a polo shirt, Vanessa in designer jeans and a flowing top that did little to disguise her early pregnancy. "Mom, what's this about?" Michael asked as soon as greetings had been exchanged. "And who is this?" He nodded toward Patricia. "This is Patricia Chen, my attorney," I said calmly. "And this meeting is about establishing some facts before we continue any discussion about my future living arrangements." "An attorney?" Vanessa's eyebrows rose. "Barbara, that seems rather dramatic for a family conversation." "I don't think it's dramatic to have proper legal representation when discussing matters that affect my life and assets," I replied. "Now, shall we begin?" James cleared his throat and took control of the meeting with the smooth professionalism that had always impressed me. "Thank you all for coming. Mrs. Wilson has asked me to provide a comprehensive overview of her financial position, as she feels there may be some misunderstandings that are affecting family planning discussions." He distributed folders to each person at the table. These contain summaries of Mrs. Wilson's various accounts and holdings, along with current market valuations of her real estate investments. I've included a net worth statement on the first page that consolidates this information. Michael opened his folder, his expression shifting from impatience to confusion as he scanned the contents. Beside him, Vanessa's eyes widened, her lips parting in surprise. "There must be some mistake," Michael said, looking up at James, then at me. "These numbers." "There's no mistake," I said quietly. "I've been building my investment portfolio for over 30 years, Michael, since before your father died." "But this says you own the Riverside Plaza shopping center," Vanessa interjected, tapping one of the papers with a manicured nail. "And an apartment building on Elm Street." "The commercial property was my first major real estate investment," I confirmed. "I purchased it when you were in college, Michael. The apartment building was a more recent acquisition, about 7 years ago." Michael was flipping through the pages with increasing agitation. Municipal bonds, dividend stocks, precious metals. "Mom, this says your net worth is over $4 million. How is that possible? You worked as a bookkeeper. We lived paycheck to paycheck." "We never lived paycheck to paycheck," I corrected gently. "That was a narrative you created based on incomplete information. Yes, we lived modestly. Yes, I worked hard and was careful with money. But I was also investing, learning, growing my assets steadily over time." "But why didn't you tell me?" Michael demanded, hurt creeping into his voice. "Why keep this secret?" This was the question I had anticipated, the one I had prepared for most carefully. I took a moment to gather my thoughts before responding. At first, there wasn't much to tell. My early investments were small, experimental. By the time they grew into something substantial, you were focused on college, then your career, then your own family. Our conversations revolved around your life, your needs, your future. I paused, then continued more softly. "And truthfully, Michael, I was concerned that knowing about my financial situation might impact your own drive and ambition. I wanted you to build your success on your own terms, not with the expectation of an inheritance." "That wasn't your decision to make," Michael said, a flush creeping up his neck. "I had a right to know." "Did you?" Patricia spoke for the first time, her tone professional but firm. "Ms. Wilson is under no legal obligation to disclose her private financial matters, even to family members. In fact, financial privacy is a right many people value highly." "This isn't about legal obligations," Michael protested. "It's about trust, about family." "Yes, it is," I agreed, "which is why I'm sharing this information now. Because recent events have demonstrated that your perception of my financial situation is affecting how you view me and the decisions you think I should make." Vanessa, who had been unusually quiet, finally spoke up. "So you're not moving to Meadowbrook?" It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. "No, I'm not. I have no need for assisted living, either physically or financially. I intend to remain in my home for the foreseeable future." "But what about when you do need help?" Michael pressed. "Everyone gets old, Mom. Even with money, you can't stay independent forever." "When I need additional support," I said steadily, "I'll arrange for it on my own terms. My financial resources give me options: private caregivers, home modifications, whatever becomes necessary. And I've already put legal documents in place to ensure my wishes are respected if I become unable to express them myself." I nodded to Patricia, who withdrew another document from her briefcase. "This is Ms. Wilson's Advance Healthcare Directive and Durable Power of Attorney for Healthcare Decisions. As you'll note, she has appointed me as her healthcare agent, with her friend Eleanor Simmons as the alternate." "Not me?" Michael's voice was small, hurt. "You didn't choose me?" The pain in his expression made my heart ache, but I kept my voice gentle but firm. "Michael, the events of the past few weeks have shown me that while you care deeply, you might not always prioritize my wishes over what you think is best. A healthcare agent needs to be an advocate for my expressed desires, even when they're difficult or inconvenient." "That's not fair," he protested. "We were just trying to help." "Were you?" I asked quietly. "Or were you trying to solve a problem that was more about your concerns than my actual needs?" The question hung in the air between us. James, sensing the tension, intervened with professional smoothness. "Perhaps this would be a good time to discuss future planning in light of this new information. Mrs. Wilson has significant assets that will require ongoing management. While she is fully capable of handling her affairs now, it might be beneficial to establish some collaborative approaches for the future." For the next hour, we discussed practical matters: my investment strategy, my property management arrangements, my estate plans. Throughout, Michael remained subdued, occasionally asking questions, but mostly listening with an expression I couldn't quite read. Vanessa alternated between apparent boredom and sudden intense interest, particularly when the discussion turned to my will and eventual distribution of assets. By the time the meeting concluded, the afternoon sun was casting long shadows through the conference room windows. James collected the folders and reminded everyone that the information shared was confidential. Patricia confirmed that she would be sending updated legal documents for my signature early next week. The formalities provided a buffer, a way to end the meeting without immediately confronting the emotional undercurrents that remained unaddressed. As we gathered our belongings, Michael finally asked the question that had clearly been bothering him throughout the meeting. "Mom, why now? Why reveal all this now, after keeping it secret for so long?" I looked at my son, the child I had raised alone, the man I had sacrificed for, the person I loved most in the world despite the recent strain between us, and answered truthfully, "Because you called me a burden, Michael, and I needed you to understand that I am anything but that." His face flushed with shame. "I didn't mean it like that." "Perhaps not," I acknowledged, "but that's how it felt, and it made me realize that our relationship had become unbalanced in ways that weren't healthy for either of us." Vanessa, surprisingly, was the one who broke the uncomfortable silence that followed. "Well," she said, her voice oddly bright, "this certainly changes things. We should have dinner soon, Barbara. Clearly we have a lot more to talk about." The sudden shift in her tone, from the dismissive attitude she'd shown at Meadowbrook to this new, almost eager friendliness, was so transparent it would have been comical under different circumstances. Now, it just felt sad. "I think we all need some time to process today's discussion," I said diplomatically. "But yes, dinner sometime soon would be nice." Outside the bank, we parted ways with awkward hugs and promises to be in touch. I watched Michael and Vanessa walk to their car, heads bent together in intense conversation. I had no illusions about what they were discussing. The revelations of the day had undoubtedly thrown their assumptions and plans into disarray. Patricia touched my arm gently. "You did well in there, Barbara. How are you feeling?" "Relieved," I said, surprising myself with the truth of it. "And sad. And a little hopeful, too. Is that strange?" "Not at all," she assured me. Family. Relationships are complicated. This was a necessary reset, but it doesn't magically resolve the underlying issues. That will take time and effort from all of you. "If Michael and Vanessa are willing," I added, voicing the concern that had been lurking beneath my thoughts all day. "Give them time," Patricia advised. "Today was a shock for them. How they respond once they've had a chance to absorb everything will tell you a lot about the path forward." I nodded, thanked her for her support, and headed to my car. The late afternoon air held the crisp promise of autumn, leaves beginning to turn gold and crimson on the trees lining the bank's parking lot. A season of change, of letting go, of preparation for what comes next. It felt fitting. The next few days passed quietly. I didn't hear from Michael, though I hadn't really expected to. He had always needed time to process difficult emotions, even as a child. Instead of worrying about his silence, I focused on activities that brought me joy. My painting class, volunteer work at the community garden, coffee with friends who valued me for who I was, not what I owned. On Wednesday evening, just as I was preparing a simple dinner for myself, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting visitors, and for a moment I considered ignoring it. But curiosity won out, and I made my way to the front door, peering through the peephole to see Michael standing on my porch, alone. I opened the door, unsure what to expect. He looked tired, the shadows under his eyes suggesting he hadn't been sleeping well. "May I come in?" he asked, his voice subdued. I stepped aside, wordlessly inviting him into the home where he had grown up, the home he had recently tried to convince me to leave. We moved to the living room, sitting across from each other, me in my favorite armchair, him on the edge of the sofa, hands clasped between his knees. "I owe you an apology," he began, the words coming out in a rush, as if he'd rehearsed them but was afraid he might lose his nerve. "What I said about you being a burden, it was cruel and untrue. I'm deeply sorry." I nodded, acknowledging his words but waiting to see if there was more. "These past few days," he continued, "I've been thinking about everything. About how you raised me on your own after Dad died. About all the sacrifices you made so I could have opportunities. About how I never really asked about your dreams, your plans." His voice caught, and he took a moment to compose himself. "I think somewhere along the way, I started seeing you not as a complete person with your own life and aspirations, but just as my mom. Like, that was your entire identity. And when Vanessa and I started talking about the future, about the baby, I just assumed you would fit into our plans in whatever way was most convenient for us." "That hurt," I said quietly. "Being seen as an afterthought rather than someone whose wishes and autonomy matter." "I know," he acknowledged, "and I can't excuse it. All I can say is that I didn't fully realize what I was doing until you forced me to see it." He glanced around the living room, his gaze lingering on familiar objects, the bookshelf his father had built, the collection of family photographs on the wall, the quilt draped over the back of the sofa that my grandmother had made. "This is your home," he said softly. "It was presumptuous and wrong of me to suggest you should leave it before you were ready." "Yes, it was," I agreed, not unkindly, but not letting him off the hook either. "Just as it was wrong to make assumptions about my financial situation without asking me directly." "About that," Michael said, shifting uncomfortably. I'm still trying to process everything. It's not about the money itself, Mom. It's about feeling like there was this whole side of your life I knew nothing about, like I didn't really know you at all. You know the parts of me I've shared, I said. Just as I know the parts of you that you've shared. No relationship involves complete transparency, Michael. We all have private aspects of our lives. I understand that, he said. But this seems like more than just privacy. It feels like you didn't trust me. I considered his words carefully before responding. It wasn't about trust, not exactly. It was about wanting you to see me as your mother, not as a financial resource or an investment portfolio. And it was about wanting you to build your own life without expectations of inheritance or assistance from me. But I never asked you for money, Michael protested. Even when things were tight after the wedding, even when we were saving for the house, I never came to you for help. No, you didn't, I acknowledged, and I respected that. But would that have remained true if you'd known the full extent of my assets? Would you have made the same choices, worked as hard, if you'd known there was a financial safety net? Michael didn't answer immediately, and I appreciated his honesty in not offering a reflexive denial. I don't know, he finally admitted. I'd like to think it wouldn't have changed anything, but honestly, I can't be sure. We sat in silence for a moment, the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway marking the passage of time. Where do we go from here? Michael eventually asked, his voice vulnerable in a way I hadn't heard since he was a teenager, uncertain about his place in the world. Forward, I said simply, with greater understanding and respect on both sides. I'm still your mother, Michael. That hasn't changed, but I'm also a person in my own right, with my own plans and decisions to make. And I'm still your son, he said, who loves you and wants what's best for you, even if I haven't been very good at showing it lately. I smiled, feeling the first genuine warmth between us since the Meadowbrook debacle began. We'll figure it out together, but as equals, Michael, not as caretaker and dependent. He nodded, relief evident in the relaxing of his shoulders. That sounds right. He hesitated, then asked, What about Vanessa? She wasn't. She didn't handle the bank meeting very well. That was an understatement. Vanessa's transparent shift from dismissive to obsequious had been both obvious and uncomfortable for everyone present. Vanessa and I will find our own way forward, I said diplomatically. She's carrying my grandchild after all. That creates a bond, regardless of our personal relationship. She's trying, Michael said, though his tone suggested even he wasn't entirely convinced. The pregnancy has been difficult for her, the morning sickness, the hormones. She's not always at her best right now. I chose not to point out that Vanessa's attitude toward me had been problematic long before her pregnancy. Some conversations were for another day. Speaking of the baby, I said, changing the subject to easier territory, have you started thinking about names yet? Michael's face lit up, and for the next hour, we talked about the future in a way that felt genuine and connected. Not about nursing homes or financial arrangements, but about family, hopes, the continuation of life through new generations. It wasn't a complete resolution of our issues. Those would take time and ongoing effort to address. But it was a beginning. When Michael finally left, promising to call over the weekend, I felt a cautious optimism about our relationship. The truth had been painful but necessary, clearing away assumptions and misconceptions that had been quietly poisoning our connection for years. I returned to the kitchen, where my abandoned dinner preparations awaited. As I chopped vegetables for a salad, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. From a young widow struggling to raise a son alone, to a woman who had built financial security through determination and discipline, to this newest chapter, a grandmother-to-be, reclaiming her autonomy and redefining her relationship with her adult child. The path hadn't been straight or easy. There had been setbacks, mistakes, moments of doubt. But I had persevered, adapting to changing circumstances while staying true to my core values. And I would continue to do so, regardless of what challenges lay ahead. Because contrary to what Michael had momentarily believed, I wasn't a burden. I was a woman of substance, financially, yes, but more importantly, in character, resilience, and self-determination. And that was a legacy worth preserving, worth fighting for, and ultimately, worth passing on to the generations that would follow. 2 weeks after the meeting at Meridian Bank, I received an unexpected invitation to Sunday dinner at Michael and Vanessa's home. The text message arrived on Friday afternoon, just as I was finishing a volunteer shift at the Community Art Center, where I taught watercolor classes to seniors, real seniors, in their 80s and 90s, who approached their creative endeavors with a joy and freedom I found inspiring. "Mom, we'd like you to come for dinner this Sunday at 5. Nothing fancy, just family time. Please say yes." The request touched me with its simplicity, free of the condescension that had colored our recent interactions. I texted back a brief acceptance, and then returned to cleaning paintbrushes, wondering what to expect from this gathering. Sunday evening arrived clear and cool. I drove myself to their suburban home, opting for independence rather than accepting Michael's offer to pick me up. The house sat in a new development of large, similarly styled homes, what real estate agents called executive properties, with manicured lawns and 3-car garages. It was impressive, but somehow impersonal, as if designed to convey status, rather than comfort. I parked my practical sedan between Vanessa's luxury SUV and a vehicle I didn't recognize, straightened my simple but elegant blouse, and approached the front door with a bottle of good wine and cautious optimism. The door opened before I could ring the bell. Michael stood there, looking simultaneously eager and nervous. "Mom, you're right on time," he said, leaning in for a hug that felt more natural than any we'd shared in months. "Come in. Everyone's in the living room." "Everyone?" I wondered, following him through the grand foyer with its soaring ceiling and crystal chandelier. We entered the formal living room, and I stopped short at the sight of Vanessa sitting with her parents, Robert and Diane Hampton. This was unexpected. Robert Hampton was a cardiac surgeon with a reputation for both skill and arrogance. Diane managed his medical practice and cultivated their social position with the same meticulous attention she gave to her designer wardrobe and highlighted hair. They had always treated me with polite dismissal, as if Michael had married beneath his station by choosing their daughter, and they had graciously chosen to overlook this unfortunate connection to someone of my modest background. "Barbara, how lovely to see you," Diane said, rising with practiced grace to air-kiss my cheek. Her eyes, I noticed, assessed my outfit with new interest. "We were just talking about you." "All good things, I hope," I replied pleasantly, handing the wine to Michael and taking the seat he indicated. A comfortable armchair slightly separated from the sofa where the Hampton family sat in a united front. "Michael and Vanessa have been telling us about your financial acumen," Robert said, the slight hesitation revealing his struggle to reconcile my bookkeeper image with the reality Michael had presumably shared. Quite impressive for someone without formal training in investment strategy. The condescension remained, just shifted to new territory. Once I had been dismissed for my perceived financial limitations. Now I was being patronized for succeeding without the proper credentials or background. "Thank you," I said simply. "I've always believed that practical experience and thoughtful research can compensate for formal education in many fields." The subtle reminder that his expensive medical degree wasn't the only path to success wasn't lost on Robert, whose smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Dinner's almost ready," Vanessa announced, rising with a hand placed protectively over her slightly rounded abdomen. "Michael grilled steaks, and I prepared those roasted vegetables you like, Barbara." I couldn't recall ever expressing a preference for roasted vegetables to Vanessa, but I appreciated the gesture, however manufactured it might be. The dinner that followed was a strange experience. conversation flowing with artificial pleasantness, everyone carefully avoiding the elephant in the room. We discussed safe topics, the pregnancy, local news, a recent art exhibition I had attended. The Hamptons were more attentive than I had ever known them to be, asking questions about my volunteer work and listening with apparent interest to my responses. It wasn't until dessert, a store-bought cheesecake that Vanessa presented as if it were a personal creation, that Robert Hampton cleared his throat and shifted the conversation to its intended purpose. "Barbara, we've been thinking about your situation," he began, using the same phrase Michael had used to introduce the Meadowbrook proposition. "With the baby coming, family is more important than ever. We should be supporting each other, spending time together." I took a small bite of cheesecake and waited, sensing there was more coming. "The thing is," Diane continued smoothly, "your home is so far from Michael and Vanessa. 30 minutes in good traffic, nearly an hour during rush hour. That's going to make it difficult for you to be involved with your grandchild's daily life. I managed to raise Michael while working full-time," I pointed out mildly. "I'm quite capable of driving across town to visit my grandchild regularly." "Of course you are," Michael interjected quickly. "But Mom, we were thinking about something more integrated." "Go on," I said, setting down my dessert fork and giving him my full attention. "Well, there's a house for sale in this neighborhood," Michael explained. "Just 3 streets over. It's smaller than this one, but still very nice. 4 bedrooms, open floor plan, all the modern amenities, and it would mean you're just minutes away. You could be part of our daily lives, help with the baby when it comes, join us for impromptu dinners." "It sounds lovely," I said carefully, "but I'm very happy in my current home. It has everything I need, and I've spent decades making it my own." "But your house is so dated," Vanessa said, unable to keep the disdain from her voice. "The kitchen hasn't been updated since the 90s. The bathrooms are practically antiques. And all those stairs can't be good for someone your age." "My age?" I repeated, raising an eyebrow. "I'm 67, Vanessa, not 97. I climb those stairs multiple times a day without issue. And the vintage character of my home suits me perfectly." "We just think you'd be more comfortable in a modern space," Diane insisted. "And being closer to family as you age is so important. Robert has seen too many elderly patients struggling alone when health issues arise." "I appreciate your concern," I said, growing increasingly aware that this dinner had been orchestrated with a specific agenda. "But I've made my decision to stay in my home. It's where I'm comfortable, where my friends know to find me, where I've built my life." Robert exchanged glances with Michael before leaning forward, adopting what I imagined was his authoritative doctor persona. "Barbara, let's be practical. Your home's value has appreciated substantially since you purchased it, but it's still in an older neighborhood with limited amenities. This development offers walking trails, a community pool, even a small clubhouse with social activities. It, too, would be a significant lifestyle upgrade. Not to mention the investment potential," Diane added eagerly. "Property values in this development are projected to increase at least 15% over the next 5 years. It would be a smart financial move to sell your older home and buy into this area now." I had to suppress a smile at the irony. After learning about my investment portfolio, they now presume to advise me on financial strategy. "I don't make housing decisions based solely on investment potential," I explained patiently. "My home meets my needs perfectly. The neighborhood has character and history. My garden has taken years to establish. These things have value beyond what can be calculated in dollars." Michael looked disappointed but not surprised by my resistance. Vanessa, however, seemed genuinely perplexed, as if she couldn't comprehend why anyone would choose an older, smaller home over a newer, larger one in a prestigious development. "Mom," Michael said softly, "this isn't like the Meadowbrook situation. We're not trying to put you somewhere. We're trying to bring you closer." Are you? I asked, genuinely curious. Or are you trying to reshape my life to fit your vision of what's appropriate for someone my age and in my position? An uncomfortable silence followed. Robert Hampton broke it with a direct question that revealed the likely origin of this dinner invitation. Barbara, forgive my bluntness, but exactly how significant is your net worth? Michael mentioned a figure, but I wonder if perhaps he misunderstood. Ah, there it was. The real reason for the Hamptons' newfound interest in my living situation. Diane shot her husband a warning look, but her eyes betrayed the same curiosity. My financial details are private, I said firmly. What matters is that I have more than sufficient resources to maintain my current lifestyle and prepare for any future needs that might arise. I don't require financial guidance or housing suggestions based on economic considerations. Of course, Robert backpedaled smoothly. We're just trying to look out for family. Now that we know you have options, we want to make sure you're making the most of them. The remainder of the evening passed in strained conversation, with periodic attempts to return to the housing suggestion that I politely but firmly deflected. When I finally rose to leave, declining coffee and citing an early morning commitment, there was a palpable sense of relief from everyone. Michael walked me to my car, the night air cool against our faces after the warmth of the house. I'm sorry if that was uncomfortable, he said quietly. It wasn't supposed to go that way. How was it supposed to go? I asked, genuinely curious. He sighed, running a hand through his hair, a gesture so reminiscent of his father that it momentarily caught my heart. I thought if you saw how convenient it would be to live closer, how much it would mean to have you near the baby. I didn't expect my in-laws to turn it into an inquisition about your finances. Michael, I said gently, I understand wanting family close. I do. But moving to this neighborhood wouldn't be right for me. It's your world, not mine. I would feel out of place here. But you'd adjust, he insisted. You'd make new friends, find new activities. I have friends. I have activities. I have a life that I've built carefully and that brings me joy. Please try to understand and respect that. He looked down, scuffing his shoe against the perfect pavement of his driveway. I just want us to be close again, like we used to be. Physical proximity doesn't create emotional closeness, I pointed out. That comes from mutual respect, from seeing each other as we truly are, not as we wish each other to be. He nodded slowly. I'm trying, Mom. It's just everything changed so fast. Finding out about your finances, the baby coming, Vanessa's parents getting involved. I'm still figuring out where we go from here. We go forward, I told him, the same answer I had given in his living room after the bank meeting. But we do it with honest communication and respect for each other's autonomy. That's how adult relationships work. I hugged him goodbye, climbed into my car, and drove home through the quiet suburban streets. As I left the manicured development behind and entered my own eclectic, established neighborhood with its diverse architecture and mature trees, I felt myself relaxing. This was where I belonged, not in some cookie-cutter executive home surrounded by people who measured worth by square footage and luxury car brands. The following morning, I received a text from Vanessa. We hope you'll reconsider the house opportunity. It would mean so much to have you close by when the baby comes. I could really use your help and guidance. The message was so transparently manipulative that I almost laughed out loud. 2 months ago, Vanessa had dismissed the idea that I could offer any meaningful assistance with a newborn. Now, suddenly, my help and guidance were desperately needed, but only if I purchased an expensive home in their prestigious neighborhood. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I made a cup of tea and carried it out to my garden, settling into the wrought iron chair beneath the oak tree I had planted when Michael started kindergarten. The tree was magnificent now, providing dappled shade for my reading nook and sanctuary for the birds that serenaded me each morning. How could I explain to Michael and Vanessa that this tree alone meant more to me than all the walking trails and community pools their development could offer? As I sipped my tea, I thought about the changes in my relationship with Michael since the revelation of my financial status. There had been initial shock, then tentative reconciliation, and now this strange new dynamic where my preferences were acknowledged but still not fully respected. We were finding our way toward a new understanding, but it was a bumpy path. My phone rang, interrupting my reflections. It was Eleanor, my investment mentor and friend. "Barbara, are you free for lunch today? I have something I'd like to discuss with you." We met at a small bistro downtown, one of our favorite spots with its quiet corners and excellent food. Eleanor was already seated at our usual table by the window, elegant as always in a tailored suit that belied her 80 years. She rose to greet me with a warm hug. "You look well," she observed as we settled into our chairs. "Better than when I saw you last month. Standing up for yourself agrees." "With you," I smiled. "It's been an adjustment, but yes, I think it was necessary. Michael and I are finding our way to a new kind of relationship." "And how is that going?" she asked, her shrewd eyes missing nothing. I recounted the Sunday dinner, complete with the Hamptons' thinly veiled curiosity about my finances and the push to relocate to their neighborhood. Eleanor listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding in recognition of tactics she had likely encountered herself over the years. "Classic," she said when I finished. "Once people discover you have resources, they suddenly have all sorts of helpful suggestions about how you should be using them, usually in ways that somehow benefit them or align with their worldview." "Exactly," I agreed. "It's as if my financial independence gives them a new angle to pursue rather than a reason to respect my autonomy." "Which brings me to why I wanted to meet today," Eleanor said, leaning forward slightly. "I have a proposition for you." She explained that she had been approached by a local women's organization about starting a financial literacy program specifically designed for women in midlife and beyond. Women who find themselves widowed or divorced after decades of marriage, women re-entering the workforce after raising children, women who have always deferred financial decisions to others and now need to take control. "It sounds wonderful," I said sincerely. "There's such a need for that kind of education." "Yes, there is," Eleanor agreed. "And I think you would be the perfect person to help develop and lead this program." I blinked in surprise. "Me? I'm not a financial advisor or educator." "You're something more valuable," Eleanor countered. "You're someone who started from scratch and built significant wealth through self-education and discipline. You understand the challenges these women face because you've faced them yourself. Your story would be incredibly inspiring." The idea was both flattering and intimidating. I had never considered sharing my financial journey publicly. It had always been a private aspect of my life, something I pursued quietly alongside my more visible roles as mother, employee, and community volunteer. "I don't know, Eleanor," I said hesitantly. "I've never seen myself as a teacher or mentor in this area." "But you are," she insisted. "You've been quietly making smart financial decisions for decades. And now, at a time when many women your age are financially vulnerable, you're completely independent. That's a powerful example." She went on to outline her vision for the program. Weekly workshops covering basic financial concepts, investment strategies, retirement planning, and estate considerations. "We wouldn't be giving specific investment advice," she clarified, "just education and empowerment, helping women understand that it's never too late to take control of their financial future." By the time our lunch concluded, I had tentatively agreed to meet with the women's organization leadership the following week to discuss the possibility further. As I drove home, I found myself intrigued by this unexpected opportunity. Throughout my life, I had defined myself primarily through my relationships and responsibilities: daughter, wife, mother, employee. The idea of being recognized for my financial acumen, of using that knowledge to help others, opened a new dimension of identity I had never fully explored. The meeting with the women's organization went better than I could have anticipated. The leadership team, comprised of accomplished women from various professional backgrounds, welcomed me warmly and listened with genuine interest as I shared aspects of my financial journey. They weren't interested in the specific numbers, my net worth, my investment returns, but rather in the process, the learning curve, the mindset that had allowed me to build security and independence over time. "This is exactly the perspective our program needs," said Catherine Lewis, the organization's executive director. "Not get-rich-quick promises or complex investment strategies, but practical, accessible approaches to building financial literacy and confidence." We spent 2 hours outlining what would become the Financial Freedom After 50 program, a 12-week curriculum covering everything from basic budgeting to understanding investment options, reading financial statements, evaluating insurance, needs, and planning for long-term care costs. I would co-lead the sessions with a certified financial planner who could provide the technical expertise while I offered the lived experience component. As the meeting concluded, Catherine asked a question that caught me off guard. "Would you be comfortable sharing your story publicly as part of promoting this program? We find that personal narratives are the most powerful way to engage participants." I hesitated, thinking about the privacy I had maintained for decades. "What aspects of my story did you have in mind?" "Nothing that would compromise your financial privacy," Catherine assured me. "Just the broad strokes, how you educated yourself, the general strategies you employed, the mindset that allowed you to succeed. Your journey from financial vulnerability after your husband's death to complete independence today." After some consideration, I agreed. If my experience could help other women build security and confidence, the value of that outweighed my preference for privacy. We scheduled a professional photograph for the program materials and a video interview that would be used to promote the workshops. The day after the photo shoot, I received an unexpected call from Michael. "Mom, are you sitting down? You need to see something." "What is it?" I asked, immediately concerned by his tone. "You're on the front page of the community section in today's newspaper. There's a huge photo of you with a headline about some financial program for women. When did this happen?" I had expected the article to be a small announcement, perhaps buried in the community events calendar. Instead, the editor had apparently decided it was a feature-worthy story. "From widow to wealth builder, local woman launches financial literacy program." "It's a program I'm helping develop with the Women's Leadership Coalition," I explained. "We're launching workshops next month to help women build financial literacy and independence." "But Mom, the article mentions that you're a self-made millionaire who built your wealth through strategic investments and financial discipline. It practically announces to the entire community that you have significant assets." I understood his concern, but I also recognized that it was rooted in outdated thinking. The idea that women, particularly older women, should keep their financial status private to avoid becoming targets. "Michael, I'm not ashamed of my success," I said firmly. "And if my story helps other women believe they can achieve financial security, then I'm comfortable with it being public knowledge." "But what about safety concerns? Privacy? Mom, you live alone in a house that everyone now knows belongs to a wealthy woman." "I appreciate your concern," I said, touched by his protective instinct even as I rejected its premise. "But my home has a security system. I'm careful about who I allow into my personal space. And frankly, the article doesn't specify any amounts. It just establishes that I've built financial security through careful planning and investment." Michael wasn't entirely convinced, but he eventually accepted that this was my decision to make. What he didn't say, but what I suspected lay beneath his concern, was worry about how this public recognition of my financial acumen might affect perceptions of him. Would friends and colleagues wonder why he hadn't known about his own mother's wealth? Would they question his relationship with me or his own financial judgment? These were his issues to work through, not mine to manage. For too long, I had shaped my choices around protecting Michael's feelings and perceptions. It was time for both of us to embrace our separate identities and journeys. The Financial Freedom After 50 program launched the following month with overwhelming response. The 20 spots in the initial workshop filled within days, with a waiting list quickly forming for the next session. The women who enrolled came from diverse backgrounds but shared common concerns: outliving their resources, navigating financial systems designed by and for men, building confidence in their decision-making abilities. During the introductory session, I shared parts of my story that I had never spoken of publicly before. The fear I felt after Thomas died, leaving me with a young child and minimal savings. The determination to educate myself about finance, despite having no background in the field. The careful balancing of short-term needs with long-term security goals. The satisfaction of watching my modest investments grow over decades into substantial wealth. The most important thing I learned, I told the group of attentive women, is that financial independence isn't just about money. It's about having options, making choices based on what you truly want, rather than what circumstances force upon you. It's about never having to stay in situations, jobs, relationships, living arrangements that diminish you because you lack the resources to leave. The workshops quickly became the highlight of my week. Watching women who had initially been intimidated by financial terminology grow in knowledge and confidence was deeply satisfying. We celebrated small victories, a participant negotiating better terms on a car loan, another reviewing her investment portfolio for the first time and identifying unnecessary fees, a third initiating important conversations with adult children about her wishes for later life care. 6 weeks into the program, I received a surprise visitor at one of our sessions. Vanessa arrived just as we were concluding, hovering at the back of the room until the participants had dispersed, chatting among themselves as they gathered their materials and handbags. "This is unexpected," I said, approaching her with genuine curiosity. "Did Michael tell you where to find me?" Vanessa nodded, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "I hope it's okay that I came. I saw the article in the paper, and I've been thinking about it ever since." "Of course it's okay," I assured her, gesturing to a nearby chair. "Would you like to sit? How are you feeling? The pregnancy seems to be progressing well." She sat, unconsciously resting her hand on her now visible baby bump. "I'm fine. Everything's healthy." She paused, seeming to gather her thoughts. "Barbara, I owe you an apology. I haven't treated you with the respect you deserve." The admission surprised me. Vanessa had never struck me as someone comfortable with acknowledging mistakes or shortcomings. "Thank you for saying that," I said simply, giving her space to continue. "When we first met, I made assumptions about you based on your job, your house, your lifestyle. I thought you were." She hesitated, clearly searching for a diplomatic way to express what had been undiplomatically clear in her behavior. "Less sophisticated, less accomplished, less worthy of consideration?" I supplied, not unkindly. She nodded, having the grace to look embarrassed. "All of those things. And then when we found out about your financial situation, I was shocked. But I still didn't really get it. I thought maybe you had inherited money or gotten lucky with a single investment. But then I read that article," she continued, "and I realized you built everything yourself, through knowledge and discipline and patience. You did what most people never managed to do, and you did it without anyone's help or guidance." Was touched by her recognition, even as I noted the irony that it had taken public acknowledgement of my accomplishments for Vanessa to see me clearly. "Thank you. It wasn't always easy, but it was worth every sacrifice and effort." "That's why I'm here," she said, leaning forward slightly. "I want to join your program. I know you probably think that's ridiculous. I have an MBA. I work in marketing for a financial services company. I should know this stuff already. But you don't? I asked, genuinely curious. She shook her head. Not the way you do. I understand corporate finance, marketing metrics, how to present financial products to consumers. But personal finance? Investing for the long term? Building true security? That's different. I considered her request carefully. Having Vanessa in the workshop could be complicated. Our history, the family dynamics, the potential for her presence to change the group dynamic for other participants. But denying her this opportunity would contradict everything the program stood for. Empowering women to take control of their financial futures, regardless of their starting point or background. The current session is full, I told her, but we're starting another in 8 weeks. I'd be happy to have you join that group if you're interested. Relief washed over her face. I am. Very interested. And Barbara? I hope this might be a new beginning for us. A chance to get to know each other as people, not just as Michael's mother and wife. As she left, promising to register officially, through the program website, I reflected on the unexpected turns my life had taken since that fateful Meadowbrook tour. From being perceived as a burden to being recognized as a resource. From hiding my financial accomplishments to sharing them publicly. From a strained relationship with my daughter-in-law to the possibility of a new understanding based on mutual respect. None of it had been planned or anticipated. But perhaps that was the greatest lesson of all, that life continues to evolve and surprise us, offering new possibilities and pathways if we remain open to them and steadfast in our self-respect and values. The baby, a girl they named Rebecca, Claire, arrived 2 weeks early but perfectly healthy. Michael called from the hospital, his voice thick with emotion as he described his daughter's red hair, just like yours, Mom, and strong grip on his finger. I visited the next day, bringing a small gift, a silver rattle that had been mine as a baby, carefully preserved through decades, and my photographer friend who captured beautiful images of 3 generations together. Holding my granddaughter, for the first time I experienced a rush of love and protectiveness that felt both familiar and entirely new. She was a continuation, a future, a reminder that life flows forward in unexpected and wonderful ways. As I gazed at her perfect face, I made a silent promise. I would help her grow into a woman who understood her own worth, who never confused material wealth with true value, and who knew how to build independence in all its forms, financial, emotional, spiritual. She's beautiful, I whispered to Michael, who hovered nearby, alternating between proud father and anxious new parent. And she's lucky to have you as her father. I learned from the best, he said, meeting my eyes with a sincerity that healed old wounds. You showed me what it means to put your child's needs first, to work hard, to persevere. I want to give Rebecca everything you gave me. Just make sure she knows that the most valuable gifts aren't things, I advised gently. They're time, attention, respect for her as an individual. Those were always the most important things I tried to give you. I know that now, he acknowledged. It took me too long to understand, but I do now. As I reluctantly handed Rebecca back to the nurse for her scheduled feeding, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this moment. From the devastating loss of Thomas when Michael was just a child, through decades of hard work and careful planning, to the conflict over Meadowbrook and the revelation of my financial independence, and now to this new chapter as grandmother. None of it had been easy, but all of it had been worthwhile. The word burden no longer had power over me, if it ever truly did. I knew my value, not just in dollars and cents, though those had given me the freedom to live on my own terms, but in wisdom gained, in relationships nurtured, in lessons shared, in independence maintained. In the face of dismissal and underestimation, I had stood firm in my self-knowledge and dignity. And in doing so, I had not only protected myself, but also opened new doors of possibility and connection. As I left the hospital that day, Stepping into the bright autumn sunshine, I felt a profound sense of rightness and peace. The path ahead held new adventures, a granddaughter to love, workshops to lead, a garden that continued to bloom season after season. I would walk that path as I always had, with determination, with discernment, and with the quiet confidence that comes from knowing exactly who you are and what you're worth. The financial freedom. After 50 program had been running successfully for 6 months when I received an invitation that would change everything once again. It arrived by email from Catherine Lewis, the executive director of the Women's Leadership Coalition. Barbara, I'd like to discuss an exciting opportunity with you. Are you available for coffee tomorrow? We met at our usual spot, the quiet corner table at Riverside Cafe, where we'd planned so many aspects of the workshop series. Catherine looked particularly energetic that morning, practically vibrating, with enthusiasm as she outlined what she called the next logical step in our work together. The response to your workshops has been phenomenal, she began, pulling out a folder filled with participant evaluations and testimonials. Women aren't just learning about finance. They're fundamentally changing how they see themselves and their capabilities. Your personal story resonates so deeply because it challenges the narrative that older women are financially vulnerable or dependent. I nodded, gratified by the impact our work was having, but sensing there was more to this meeting than a progress report. I'm glad the program is making a difference. The women are doing the hard work. I'm just providing some guidance and encouragement. You're doing much more than that, Catherine countered. You're modeling a different way of aging, one built on knowledge, independence, and self-determination. Which brings me to why I wanted to meet today. She leaned forward, her expression serious. We've been approached by Greystone Media about featuring our program, specifically your story, in a documentary series they're producing on women's financial empowerment across the lifespan. I blinked in surprise. A documentary? About me? Not just about you, Catherine clarified. The series will profile women from different generations who have taken control of their financial futures in unconventional or inspiring ways. The producer was particularly interested in your journey after reading the newspaper feature. Your transition from widow to financial independence, culminating in this program where you're now helping other women, it's exactly the kind of narrative they want to showcase. My immediate instinct was to decline. Public speaking to small. Groups of workshop participants was one thing. Appearing in a documentary that would be viewed by thousands, perhaps millions, was quite another. I'm flattered, I said carefully, but I'm not sure I'm comfortable with that level of exposure. I understand your hesitation, Catherine acknowledged. But Barbara, think about the impact. How many women in their 60s and 70s believe it's too late to build financial security? How many have internalized the message that they should be dependent on adult children or institutions? Your story challenges all of that. She was right, of course. The most powerful aspect of our workshops had been the transformation in how participants viewed themselves, not as declining or diminishing with age, but as capable of growth, learning, and increased self-sufficiency. If my experience could reach a broader audience, perhaps it could inspire similar transformations. Can I think about it? I asked, not yet ready to commit. Of course, Catherine replied, sliding a business card across the table. This is Emma Chen, the producer. She'd love to speak with you directly about the project, answer any questions or concerns you might have. No pressure, but I hope you'll at least have the conversation. I tucked the card into my purse, promising to consider it carefully. On the drive home, my thoughts swirled with possibilities and concerns. How would Michael and Vanessa react to me participating in a documentary? Would this level of public exposure make me a target for scammers or opportunists? And was I ready to share the most personal aspects of my financial journey with strangers? These questions followed me home, lingering as I prepared dinner, watered my garden, and settled into my evening routine. By morning, Curiosity had outweighed apprehension enough that I decided to at least speak with the producer. Emma Chen answered my call immediately, her voice warm and professional as she explained the documentary series in greater detail. "We're calling it Wealth of Wisdom," she told me. "Each episode focuses on a different woman's financial journey, highlighting both the practical strategies they employed and the personal growth that accompanied their path to security and independence." "Why me?" I asked directly. "Surely there are women with more dramatic stories, larger fortunes, or more unconventional approaches." "That's precisely why you're perfect," Emma replied. "Your story isn't about overnight success or extraordinary circumstances. It's about methodical, intelligent decision-making over decades. It's accessible. Viewers will see themselves in you, an ordinary woman who achieved extraordinary results through discipline, education, and patience." We spoke for nearly an hour. Emma addressed my concerns about privacy. I would maintain control over what financial details were disclosed. Security. The production company would arrange for a security assessment of my home and provide recommendations. And the time commitment? Filming would span approximately 2 weeks, scheduled around my existing commitments. By the time we concluded the call, I found myself intrigued rather than intimidated by the possibility. Before making a decision, however, I needed to discuss this with Michael. Our relationship had improved significantly since the revelation of my financial status and the subsequent adjustments in how we interacted. The birth of Rebecca had created a new focal point for our family, shifting attention away from the tensions that had existed between us. But participating in a documentary would thrust our family dynamics back into the spotlight, potentially creating fresh complications. I invited Michael to lunch at a quiet restaurant midway between our homes, deliberately choosing neutral territory for this conversation. He arrived looking tired but happy, the natural state of a new parent navigating the exhausting joy of a deuce 4-month-old. "How's my granddaughter?" I asked as we settled into our table. "Amazing," he answered, the fatigue in his eyes immediately replaced by pride. "She's starting to recognize faces now. She absolutely lights up when she sees Vanessa or me. And yesterday, I swear she almost rolled over." "They develop so quickly at this stage," I said, remembering how each day had brought new discoveries when Michael was an infant. "And how are you and Vanessa managing?" "Tired," he admitted. "Very tired. But good. Vanessa's thinking about extending her maternity leave another 6 weeks. Her company has been surprisingly flexible." "That's wonderful," I said sincerely. "Those early months are so precious, and they go by so quickly." Our conversation flowed easily through lunch, covering Rebecca's development, Michael's work challenges, and updates on my workshops. It was only as we lingered over coffee that I broached the subject that had prompted this meeting. "I've been approached about participating in a documentary," I explained, watching Michael's expression carefully. "It's about women's financial empowerment, focusing on different generations and approaches to building security and independence." Michael's eyebrows rose in surprise. "A documentary? Like on television or streaming?" "Both, eventually. The production company has distribution arrangements with several platforms." I outlined what Emma had shared about the project, including the timeline and format. Michael was quiet for a moment, absorbing this information. "How do you feel about it?" he finally asked, surprising me with his focus on my perspective, rather than immediately expressing his own reaction. "I'm torn," I admitted. "Part of me values my privacy and is hesitant to become that publicly visible, but another part recognizes the potential impact sharing my story might have. When I was younger, I could have benefited tremendously from seeing examples of women who had successfully built financial independence, especially later in life." Michael nodded thoughtfully. "That makes sense. You've always been someone who wants to help others. It's why you were such a great mom." He paused, then added with a small smile, "And it explains why you're such a natural at those workshops." "Thank you," I said, touched by his acknowledgement. But participating would affect you too, at least indirectly. The documentary would likely mention my family situation, being widowed young, raising you alone, the recent misunderstanding about Meadowbrook. Michael winced slightly at the mention of Meadowbrook, but his voice remained steady. Mom, you should make this decision based on what you want, not how it might affect me. I'm a grown man with my own life. If part of your story involves me making some misguided assumptions about your needs and capabilities, well, that's the truth. It happened. His maturity in that moment nearly brought tears to my eyes. This was the son I had raised, thoughtful, honest, capable of growth and self-reflection. Somewhere along the way, he had lost sight of those qualities in his interactions with me, but they hadn't disappeared entirely. I appreciate that, I said. I just wanted to make sure you were comfortable before I made a decision. Whatever you decide, I support you, Michael assured me. And for what it's worth, I think your story could help a lot of people. Not just women concerned about finances, but families trying to navigate generational relationships with respect and understanding. His endorsement was the final piece I needed. The following day, I called Emma Chen and agreed to participate in the documentary, setting in motion a process that would bring both unexpected challenges and profound rewards. Filming began 3 weeks later. The production team was small and unobtrusive. Just Emma, a videographer named Marcus, and a sound technician, Layla. They moved through my home with respectful care, capturing footage of my daily routines, my garden, my home office with its organized files and investment tracking systems. We filmed interviews in my living room, where I shared the story of Thomas's death and the financial awakening that followed. The kitchen, where I described the careful budgeting and planning that had allowed me to support Michael while building a foundation for the future. And the garden, where I reflected on the parallels between cultivating plants and nurturing investments, both requiring patience, attention, and a long-term perspective. The most powerful filming day, however, took place at the community center where I conducted my workshops. With permission from the participants, the crew documented a session on retirement planning, capturing not just my presentation, but the interactions among the women, their questions, their moments of realization, the mutual support that had developed within the group. Afterward, several participants agreed to on-camera interviews, sharing how the program had changed their relationship with money and, by extension, their sense of agency in their own lives. Before Barbara's workshop, I was terrified about my financial future, confessed Martha, a 72-year-old widow whose husband had handled all their finances during their 48-year marriage. Now I understand my investments, I've updated my estate plans, and I've even started teaching my granddaughters about money. I'm not afraid anymore. Another participant, Denise, spoke about the ripple effects in her marriage. My husband always managed our money, not because he demanded control, but because I willingly gave it up. Now we make financial decisions, together, as true partners. He respects my input, and I'm no longer passive about something so important to our future. These testimonials affected me deeply. It was one thing to hope your work was making a difference. It was quite another to hear it articulated so clearly and movingly by the women themselves. Whatever discomfort I had felt about being in front of a camera was outweighed by the evidence that our program was genuinely transforming lives. The most challenging aspect of filming came when Emma requested an on-camera conversation with Michael. The story of misunderstanding between you two is powerful, she explained. It illustrates how even loving family members can make assumptions about aging parents that undermine their dignity and autonomy. Having Michael reflect on that learning process would add an important dimension to the narrative. I hesitated, concerned that revisiting that painful period might strain our newly strengthened relationship. I need to discuss this with him. First, I told Emma. It's one thing for me to share my experience. It's another to ask him to publicly acknowledge mistakes. To my surprise, when I broached the subject with Michael, he readily agreed. "It's an important part of the story," he said simply, "and maybe other adult children will recognize themselves in my assumptions and think twice before making decisions for their parents rather than with them." The conversation was filmed in my garden, Michael and I sitting at the wrought iron table beneath the oak tree. Emma kept her questions gentle but direct, guiding us through a discussion of the Meadowbrook proposal, the assumptions that had undergirded it, and the revelations that followed. Looking back, Michael reflected, I can see that I was approaching the situation from a place of unconscious bias. I saw my mother's age as defining her, as marking her as someone who needed management rather than collaboration. And I completely failed to recognize her as a whole person with her own achievements, resources, and preferences. "What would you do differently now?" Emma asked from behind the camera. Michael smiled ruefully. "I'd start by asking questions rather than making assumptions. I'd recognize that my mother's life experience, including her financial experience, is valuable and worth understanding. And I would approach conversations about the future as mutual planning between adults, not as me making decisions for someone less capable." I reached across the table and squeezed his hand, deeply touched by his honest reflection. "We both learned from that experience," I added. "I realized I had perhaps been too private about important aspects of my life, creating a situation where Michael didn't have a complete picture of my circumstances or capabilities." "Has your relationship changed as a result?" Emma prompted. "Profoundly," I answered. "There's a new foundation of mutual respect and understanding. Michael sees me more clearly now, not just as his mother, but as a person with my own identity and achievements." "And failures," Michael added with a gentle laugh. "Mom's not perfect and she doesn't have to be. That was part of my misconception too. This idea that if she wasn't completely self-sufficient in the ways I defined, then she needed to be taken care of according to my terms. The reality of aging is more complex than that," I observed. "There will likely come a time when I do need additional support. But how that support is structured, when it begins, and what form it takes, those should be decisions I participate in fully, as long as I'm mentally capable." "Exactly," Michael agreed. "And when that time comes, I hope I'll approach it with more wisdom and respect than I did during the Meadowbrook situation." That evening, after the crew had packed up their equipment and left, Michael lingered in my garden. We sat in comfortable silence as twilight descended, the air fragrant with jasmine and the distant sound of neighborhood children playing. "Do you think the documentary will make a difference?" he finally asked. "Will it change how people think about aging, about older women's capabilities?" "I hope so," I replied. "Even if it just prompts a few families to have better conversations, or inspires a few women to take control of their financial futures, it will have been worthwhile." "I'm proud of you, Mom," Michael said quietly. "Not just for the financial success or the workshops or the documentary, but for standing your ground when I tried to push you in a direction that wasn't right for you, for insisting on being seen and respected as you are." His words filled me with a deep, peaceful joy. This, even more than financial security or public recognition, was what I had most wanted, a relationship with my son based on mutual respect and understanding. The documentary, Wealth of Wisdom: Barbara's Story, was released 9 months later as part of the larger series. The response was immediate and overwhelmingly positive. I received emails from women across the country sharing how my story had inspired them to educate themselves financially, stand up to well-meaning but controlling family members, or reimagine what their later years could look like. One message particularly touched me from a woman named Judith in Arizona. "I'm 74 and widowed for 12 years. My children have been pressuring me to sell my home and move closer to them. For my own good, they say. After watching your story, I had the courage to tell them that while I value their concern, I'm happiest in my own community with my friends and familiar surroundings. Your example showed me it's never too late to assert your independence and make choices based on your own preferences rather than others' expectations. The documentary also changed how I was perceived in my own community. People who had previously seen me as just Michael's mother or the nice widow who teaches watercolors now approached me with questions about investments, retirement planning, or standing up to well-meaning but overbearing family members. I became, somewhat to my amusement, a local celebrity and authority figure on aging with dignity and financial independence. Even more gratifying was the expansion of our workshop program. With support from a national foundation impressed by the documentary, the Women's Leadership Coalition established similar financial freedom after 50 programs in 6 additional cities, with plans for further expansion. I consulted on the curriculum development and occasionally traveled to help train new facilitators, finding unexpected joy in this broader impact. Perhaps the most meaningful change, however, occurred within my family. Vanessa, who had initially joined the workshops more out of curiosity than conviction, became an enthusiastic advocate for women's financial literacy. She established a mentoring program at her company, pairing experienced female executives with younger women just starting their careers, with a particular focus on developing financial confidence and competence. I want to make sure Rebecca grows up seeing financial knowledge as a natural part of womanhood, she explained when I expressed surprise at her involvement. Not something mysterious or intimidating, but a basic life skill like cooking or driving. The mention of Rebecca brought a smile to my face. My granddaughter was now a lively toddler, curious about everything and fiercely independent even at 18 months. Michael and Vanessa had made good on their promise to ensure I was a regular presence in her life, bringing her for weekly visits and occasionally accepting my offers to babysit while they enjoyed much-needed date nights. During one such evening, as I rocked Rebecca to sleep after reading her favorite bedtime story, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment. From the young widow facing an uncertain future, to the disciplined investor building security dollar by dollar, to the mother wrongly perceived as a burden, to the mentor and advocate empowering other women. Each chapter had shaped me, challenged me, and ultimately led me forward into new possibilities I could never have anticipated. Rebecca's tiny hand curled around my finger as she drifted toward sleep, her trust complete and unquestioning. Someday, I would tell her the full story of her grandmother's journey, not just the financial aspects, but the emotional growth, the standing firm in the face of misconceptions, the finding of voice and purpose in unexpected places. I would teach her about money, yes, but more importantly about self-worth, about the courage to define yourself rather than accepting others' limitations, about the freedom that comes from self-determination in all aspects of life. For now, though, I simply held her, savoring the warmth of her small body against mine, and the knowledge that my legacy would extend far beyond the financial assets I had accumulated. The true wealth I had to share was in the wisdom gained through experience, the dignity maintained through challenge, and the independence that allowed me to live authentically and fully at every age. 6 months after the documentary aired, I received an unexpected invitation from the National Council on Aging. They were hosting a congressional briefing on financial security for older adults and wanted me to testify about the importance of financial literacy programs specifically designed for women in midlife and beyond. The invitation represented a level of influence I had never imagined for myself, the opportunity to potentially shape policy that could impact millions of older Americans. As I prepared my testimony, reviewing statistics on women's financial vulnerability in later life and the factors that contribute to it, I was struck by how far I had come from that moment in Michael's living room when I had been dismissed as a burden. From being seen as a problem to be managed, I had become recognized as part of the solution to a national challenge. The night before my flight to Washington, I sat in my garden, listening to the familiar evening sounds, Children playing, neighbors calling to one another, the distant hum of traffic, and feeling profoundly grateful for the unexpected turns my life had taken. I had never sought public recognition or influence. I had simply wanted security, independence, and the freedom to make my own choices. Yet in standing firm for those basic rights, I had somehow become a voice for countless others seeking the same dignity and autonomy. Michael called as I was finishing my packing, just checking in as he often did now, our relationship having evolved into a comfortable pattern of mutual support and respect. "Nervous about tomorrow?" he asked. "A little," I admitted. It's a long way from bookkeeping at Henderson Manufacturing to testifying before Congress. "You'll be amazing," he assured me. "Just tell your story the way you told it to me that day at the bank. It changed my perspective completely. Imagine what it could do for policymakers." "Thank you for believing in me," I said, meaning it deeply. "It means everything to have your support." "Always, Mom," he replied, his voice warm. "I'm sorry. It took me so long to really see you, who you are, what you've accomplished, what you're still capable of. But I see you now, and I couldn't be prouder." As I hung up, I realized that this, even more than financial security or public recognition, was the true wealth I had built over a lifetime. Relationships based on authentic seeing and being seen, loving and being loved, respecting and being respected. No one could call that a burden. It was, in fact, the richest blessing of all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them. Out!